today. It's the Pope, isn't it?
Yeah, let's start with the Pope's visit to Cuba that's just wrapped up. Now, El País, the Spanish newspaper, says it was a visit, really, it was billed as being pastoral, but it was entirely political, but not in the sense that you might think. They say the Pope's aim wasn't really to try and open up the Cuban regime, but just to create more place for the Catholic Church within it. They reckon the fact that he didn't meet any Cuban dissidents, he didn't say anything too controversial about the Cuban regime, is really, it shows his real purpose. He's trying to make the Catholic Church more relevant in Cuba, where it isn't particularly. People don't practice enormously, despite it being a culturally Catholic country. In 2003, the cardinal there intervened with the government to help free a large number of political prisoners, which the church hoped at the time would help it become a more relevant part of the political process there. But that hasn't really happened. So that's what El País thinks was his main aim in going there. They also noticed that he's been to Mexico on this visit, where he created controversy by not mentioning a huge clerical sex abuse scandal that's caused a huge amount of controversy there. So they say there's still no evidence that he's willing to talk about these really difficult, thorny topics. Over in the Miami Herald, which of course is a very anti-Castro newspaper over there in Florida, they say almost everyone involved in the situation could bill this papal visit to Cuba as a good thing. The regime can say, look, we're opening up, we're allowed the Pope. The Pope can say, look, I'm really open-minded, I'm meeting Fidel Castro, and that image is quite impressive, isn't it, of the Pope and Fidel Castro shaking hands. And the exiles can say, look, we've got lots of international attention being shone on our cause here. But the Miami Herald says that really none of those people have got anything much out of it, apart from a bit of PR. The exiles won't really see the regime change in any way. The Pope probably won't see much greater influence for the church on the island, and the Cuban authorities won't really see their relationship with the outside world improve as a result of this. So it's good PR for everyone, but not anything very concrete, they reckon.
Yeah, another story that could do with some good PR. A huge amount of media attention in the US over the last month. This is the shooting of Trayvon Martin.
Yes, yesterday Congress in Washington heard a whole day of hearings all about it, including Trayvon Martin's parents who came to testify, and the Democratic Congressman Bobby Rush, who was escorted out of the House for breaking the dress code because he gave a speech wearing a hoodie in solidarity with Trayvon Martin. Of course, the man who shot Martin, George Zimmerman, said that his wearing a hoodie was one of the things that made him think he was suspicious. Zimmerman, of course, hasn't been charged with any crime since shooting Trayvon Martin dead in a gated community in Florida on the 26th of February, and this has sparked demonstrations across the US. So the Huffington Post is asking, what does this and the outrage that's followed it teach us about what's really wrong with America's race relations at the moment? And they say what we should be shining a light on is the fact that the police were completely ready to buy George Zimmerman's story on faith that he felt threatened by the black teenager, and thus allow him to get off without being charged with any crime. And they say that police brutality and discrimination towards particularly young black men is the main problem in race relations in America today.
Now, The Guardian in the UK, they're revisiting a story that we talked about, Elena talked about as well, last year. This is the sinking of a boat filled with refugees from the Libyan conflict.
A dark day for Europe is The Guardian's headline on their front page today. Now, this is a boat that sunk, killing 63 people in May last year. Now, you might remember there was a controversy at the time because several NATO boats, including a French frigate, were quite near this boat full of African migrants that was left drifting in the Mediterranean for 2 weeks with no food or water. Eventually, all of those people died except for 9. So someone, The Guardian says, just left them to die. Someone's got to take responsibility. Now, they reckon that it might be NATO whose error it was, because apparently there were emergency distress calls sent out by that boat, which were transmitted to Coast Guard in Rome, who then transmitted it to NATO. But then they didn't send those signals to their boats that were in the Mediterranean. Now, they say 64 more people have died in little boats trying to cross the Mediterranean from North Africa to Europe since then. And if we're going to stop there being endless more cases like this, Europe needs to put a specific body in place to look after Coast Guard in the Mediterranean.
And finally, a story which is quite difficult to think of at the moment here in Paris because we've got the sun. Fears of a flu epidemic.
Yeah, this is quite interesting, actually. It's a controversy between different scientists in the US. At least 2 labs in the US have managed to mutate swine and bird flu together to create a kind of virus that could be as contagious as swine flu and as lethal as bird flu, which killed about 60% of people who got it, if you remember. But the US government wants them to stop their research and destroy the viruses because they're so worried they might escape and cause a real epidemic. And they also don't want them to publish their research in case terrorists get hold of it and use it to manufacture a biological weapon. But the scientists say that research has got to be in the public domain in case nature causes a mutation like this by itself.
That's Elena's pick of the international papers here on France 24. Stay with us if you can. Still to come, why a new global fuel crisis is dividing